Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Is this thing on? Are you guys on? Are you out there? How are you doing? Woohoo! Woo! I hope you got to see the sunset last night. We're going to be a little more sedate here than the mariachi band, but we've got some good content for you this morning. If you're at the door, come on in, find a seat. We're going to get started. So to start us off this morning, we're going to have some more details from the big thinkers at edX. First up is Mark Hazeltine, who is edX's Chief Product Officer, with us for his 5th Open edX conference. He, along with Marco and Nimisha, will discuss the key goals for the Open edX community for the coming year. Please welcome Mark Hazeltine. We'll find a finder for you.
Thanks, Ed. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to open up the second day of the Open edX conference. Didn't work.
Didn't work. We'll get that.
Technical difficulties? Yeah. Wait, it's still thinking.
All right, this is a great start.
I'll try to fix it.
I'll try to fix it. You start talking. I'll fix.
Okay.
You need the mic. We don't know how to do this.
Okay, so with that, hope everybody had some great, got a lot out of the sessions yesterday. I know I did, and some really good conversations going. I'm looking forward to continuing and doing more of that today.
This is not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Where's James? James, what's going on? Well, it's not Google, it's the Mac. I'm sorry, everyone.
Excuse me?
So, edX is a technology company.
Yes, it is. Okay, so what's going on? Oh, you did some. Okay, hold on. You did that.
What did I do?
You did full screen.
I didn't mean to. Okay. Good. Sort of?
What the hell's going on?
I don't know.
Okay, well, let's quit out. Reopen it.
Start. Who can do mariachi? Anyone?
Ned, you're always ready in a pinch.
I'm going to grab my computer. This is really. I'm very sorry. Yeah, we're going to grab my computer. Yeah, we are. I have no idea what just happened. Okay, we're gonna do a little computer swap here. Oh man. Back in a minute.
How does this connect? Is it?
Is it working? All right. Leave it to Namisha to save the day. Okay, sorry for that delay. Let's get started. So you've heard this or seen this slide a couple times. Adam showed it yesterday. So I just wanted to kind of pause for a minute on the vision statement for the OpenEdX platform, because I want to just emphasize like each word in here is kind of chosen carefully. So first and foremost, we're trying to think of OpenEdX, or we think of OpenEdX as a platform. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Like, what does that mean to us? We're building it collaboratively, so we cannot do it by ourselves. We need all of you to help us. We want it to be world-leading, meaning we want it to be forward-looking, showcasing the best in teaching and learning, and specifically focused around teaching and learning outcomes. So every one of these words in that statement were chosen carefully, and you're going to hear a lot more about this throughout the conference, and I'm sure you heard a lot about it yesterday. So this morning, we're going to cover 3 topics. So first and foremost, I'm going to talk about platforms and platform thinking and how that applies to OpenEdX. I'm going to use that definition and set some key goals that we want for OpenEdX in 2019. And then finally, I'm going to invite my colleagues, Marco and Namisha, up to talk through some case studies that really showcase how we've been progressing against those goals already and what we hope to achieve coming up in the next year. So let's start with so what's a platform? Platform's kind of an overused term. In the software industry, you hear it a lot. I do think it directly applies to OpenEdX for these reasons. So when you think about kind of platforms really broadly, they're just a foundation you can build something on, right? It used to involve tech stacks and hardware and software, but I think the definition has definitely moved beyond that. And what's most important is that you can build things on it that weren't originally envisioned when the people created the platform, right? So you're trying to drive innovation through platform thinking. And then if we do it well and we surround it with the right processes and tools, we empower an ecosystem to create great customer experiences on top of it. And in our case, great teaching and learning experiences. So with that definition, how does a platform apply to OpenEdX? Well, first and foremost, we need a kind of clear focus, and we feel like we have that. You need an ecosystem model. I know we've been hitting this a lot at the conference. I'm going to hit it again this morning, our approach to building the platform. And then obviously you need an engaged community. You need people in this room that are going to be making it all happen. So let's start with the key focus, right? So at edX, we're about teaching and learning innovation. So what we want to do is empower the community to create unique teaching and learning experience for their students. And we want to provide a platform that enables that. We need an ecosystem model so that we can support contributions around a small core. So we're going to try and shrink the core to exactly what it needs to be. There'll be extensions and plug-in points attached to that, and then a broader marketplace for people to build on top of. So I know we've seen this slide a few times now, but this is what we're going for. And the idea is the core is managed by edX. The middle, the plugin and extension, is shared with the community. So some will lead, some you'll lead, and some we'll collaborate on. And then the right-hand side is basically driven by the community. So, and again, none of this works without an engaged community that's building on top of this platform. So we really want to power a marketplace of products and services on top of the platform that we're creating. And over the past year, we basically revamped the entire OpenEdX website, in particular to give people a sense of what they can do on top of the platform. So the old site was very developer focused. It was hard to understand how and why you would use it. And so we were trying to be very clear about what it's capable of and where you can go to get help if you want to get started. So with that definition of OpenEdX as a platform, and happy to have a conversation if people don't think it's a platform, but we definitely do. I want to kind of share some key goals for 2019, and then we'll talk through some case studies for them. So we've already started this, but really where we want to drive in 2019 is product development collaboration across the ecosystem, so both within the community and between edX and the community. We want to start to collectively improve platform health. So there's lots of ways that this manifests. We'll talk through a couple use cases this morning, but the platform is large and we need everyone's help to maintain it and move it forward. And then expanding the teaching and learning contributions that get contributed back to the platform. So as people create things that are successful or that are good for experimentation, we can make it available to the rest of the community. So with that, I'm going to bring up Marco, who's going to talk about some case studies from 2018.
Hi, everyone. So just as a matter of introduction, which I don't think I did yesterday, or I don't remember doing yesterday, Marco Morales. I'm on the product team at edX. I've been at edX 6.5 years now, so this is really exciting to see all the progress in that time. But today I'm going to talk about case studies that look back at what we've done in the past year and use these to sort of understand the things we've done, as Mark said, respective to those goals. So I'll be talking about evolving content storage and platform documentation and handing it over to Nimisha for the next two. So the first case study we want to talk about is evolving content storage. This is something that you've heard about a lot in the form of block store, and you'll be hearing more about later today as well. But really what we want to sort of highlight here is actually a slide that Adam showcased yesterday, highlighting the effort block store as a core technical innovation in the platform. And we want to really celebrate and call out the fact that this is a really exemplary example of having the community sort of identify shared vision or sort of connection to the broader platform and not just sort of driving their individual use cases. And so thanks to sort of Rob Lewin team, LabXchange at Harvard, as well as collaboration with OpenCraft and edX, we're able to actually introduce this into the platform. So without sort of diving too much into this case study and the details of it, because we're going to have so much of it over the course of a day, the platform was originally built around courses, and we've come a long way since then. We've built programs and degrees on top of that, and a number of other people are experimenting and using the platform to deliver other forms of content. And so we think that the base change in this block store effort will enable a lot more of this experimentation and innovation moving forward, which we're excited about. So again, one of the reasons we want to highlight this case study is not the specific necessarily of the impact to the platform as much as the process and the way we went about doing that, getting involvement from the community and going back and forth on really hard problems really early in the process. And that's something we want to drive more of respective to that goal around product development collaboration. So the second case study to talk about is actually a collection of a number of different things. So this is all wrapped up under the umbrella of platform documentation. And the way we wanted to sort of walk through that is by thinking through a lot of the common questions we get from the community. And we'll start with this one. So what is the OpenNX platform? That's often something that you hear from people who are evaluating the platform, who are not yet a part of the community or ecosystem in any way, and they're looking to solve some sort of learning need. And as Mark mentioned, one of the things we've done in the past year is really revamp the way we present ourselves externally to help convey a sort of fuller picture of what is possible on the platform. And so that's one thing that we wanted to sort of call out. Another question we get asked frequently is, what is the product direction for blank, for authoring, for mobile, for badges, for other things? And so this is something that we're sort of testing different formats and exploring different ways to do that. So the Dev Summit event tomorrow on Friday will be another example of that. Opportunities for the community to talk about different parts of the platform, whether it be authoring or you name the topic. And so providing that sort of sense of where we're headed and allowing the community to have input on that is another thing we want to make progress on. Excuse me, got something in my eye. In 2019. Another common question is what changed since the last release? A lot of times for people who are working off of named releases, this is a particularly stressful question because it means how much time am I going to have to spend migrating to the next version, and I need to understand what's in it so that I know how to actually make that migration successfully. And so another sort of small call out here that we're hopeful to make more progress on as well is around release notes. Hopefully you've seen the the video for Ironwood that sort of is an attempt to summarize the things that have changed. We want to do more here to, again, help with that stress of moving from version to version. Related to what's changed is also what's being deprecated. Like, what am I depending on that the platform is moving away from for one reason or another? And that's something that we also made progress on this past year through the deprecation process, or DEPR. And that visibility is something that we knew we needed to make more progress on to actually help people identify those things earlier and not just wait for the next release notes for a named release. Another common one, and we hear this in different sort of ways, but more generally, so how can I support platform efforts? And one of the things that we're excited about is the progress through an incremental improvements effort, or what we call INCR. In particular, the one thing I'll call out for this is there's a pretty big sort of shift from Python 2 to ensuring that we support Python 3. And one of the things that this product has done is help provide visibility into the individual tasks necessary to make that happen. And we're really excited about, as Ned shared yesterday, a bunch of the contributions that have come to the platform as a result of this visibility for what we need done and how we can get help. And hopefully this animation works. There we go. Right, so another question this is kind of a catch-all for a lot of, again, different types of questions. What best practices exist for developer documentation? And what we wanted to call out here is a thing called Open edX proposals, which is something you see called out for a couple of these items, which is our way of helping to convey to the community a decision or something we're considering for the platform moving forward that we want input on. And this is an example of one of these OEPs where we looked at a bunch of different ways that we can express developer documentation and where we want to move forward. So that's something that we'll want to do more of. But sort of in summary, one of the reasons why we're calling out platform documentation as a case study is while we've made some progress in 2018, there's a lot more to do. And we feel that through these efforts, both at communicating where we're headed and showing what's changed retroactively, we can improve platform health as a community. And hopefully that sets us up to be able to deliver more teaching and learning contributions as well. And so the last thing to call out here is one of the reasons why we call out case study 1 and case study 2 is through the efforts of case study 2, or the impact in 2019 with these goals, we hope to drive many more examples like the content storage and block store case that we looked at. So with that, I will turn it over to Nimisha, who will walk through the next case studies.
Hi everyone, I'm Nimisha. I'm the chief architect at edX. What does that mean? That means I'm here to serve you. I've been at edX for 5 years, so I felt a lot of the developer pains and pleasures of working on our platform. So I empathize being a co-consumer of our platform. I'm going to talk about for our third case study here, which is architecture investments. Last year, the edX organization came forward on the plenary last year and said that edX is going to invest in our architecture. This year, I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you that you're going to help us invest in our architecture. So I'm going to talk about what we've done to date and some of the directions that we want to head. So 2018, in addition to learning how to juggle, we have an architecture team, and some of the things that we've looked at are some fundamental things that we need on our platform. Some of the things that any website would need, but we have organically, since our last 7 years, worked on some of these things, but actually taking a step back and making sure we have an intentional direction of how we want to support authentication, authorization, and configuration. There are things that we've already started working on, and so we made a lot of great progress on this. Authentication, right? Asking the question, who are you? And we've embraced OAuth 2 protocol with JSON Web Tokens. JSON Web Tokens, it's an RFC standard format for providing identity information. So we use that to communicate identity information between our services. Authorization. The edX enterprise team has invested time in creating an authorization framework based on role-based access control. That answers the question, what are you allowed to do? These are very fundamental things, but we need it, and we need something that's consistent, best practices for our platform. Configuration, our edX DevOps team, there's been some conversations around it, presentations around this. This is very important for you as a consumer and operator of our platform, and for ourselves as well. So, in addition to that, we're looking forward to working on re-platforming our platform. 7 years, we are where we are. We might have a monolith, we might have a lot of code, but we need to now think about how to make our platform so that it can move forward and be sustainable. The goals we're trying to achieve with this: time to market, approachability, and extensibility. Time to market, we want our autonomous teams to be able to move quickly. That means you as well as us. Approachability, we're talking about new developers coming to the platform, being able to make the changes that they need to make. That means you as well as us. Extensibility, being able to take that small core, being able to add the pedagogical innovations that you want to make to extend our platform. That means you as well as us. How are we going to do that? As we said, we have a small core. We want to be very explicit and define what those boundaries are, so it's very clear what goes in the core, so that can be small and maintainable in the long term, and then allow people to extend, innovate, experiment in the perimeters. Split front ends. What we're talking about here is microservices and the backends having more smaller components, so it's easier to maintain, easier to make changes, and micro front ends in our front end, the things that run in the browsers. Now, that is something that we've invested a lot of time in. The architecture team has put in a lot of effort in thinking about the right technology, whether it be React, which is it is what we've chosen, and other things to make it so that we have a common best practice for writing our front-end code. Now, this is going to have a lot of benefits for developers as well as users, and we're looking forward to making these changes. We're talking about rewriting 200 page types in our platform. That's a lot. And we don't want to be in a limbo state with old and new and all that stuff. By being able to work with you to help us, if we provide the best practices and do a lot of the piloting, and then if you as a community can help us rewrite that, what does that mean? That means we're going to get to user experience consistency much faster. So that means we're going to get to consistency for theming much faster as well. These are all things that are a mutual benefit. Whoops. So that's split front ends. The other thing that we've invested a lot of time on over the last year is around processes. And this is also very important in addition to the technology. If you want to be able to do the things that you need to do today, but come up with also a process and a standard that is going to help us move forward and maintain our platform in the long run. So we have Open edX proposals, which we call OEPs. This is something that we had started in 2016. Over the last year, though, we have made a lot more lightweight, so it's a lot more easier and approachable for people to write more OEPs. OEPs are system-wide technical decisions on best practices for our platform. The other thing for decision records that we've done is create what's called architecture decision records. These are lightweight, local decisions co-located with the code. The code provides the what is happening in the platform. Along with that, just writing a decision record of like the intention and the why behind the code makes it so that now it is a lot more approachable to our developers. They are able to see the intention behind what is happening in the code. It allows us to evolve the code as we move forward. It allows one to be able to see what has happened. For example, so now we have 40 architecture decision records in the platform, among which include a lot of the grade book and the grades changes that have happened is an example of a team taking the time to write those decision records, and it's just a historical trail. The other important process is around deprecation and removal. We want a platform as we move forward to be able to be streamlined, right? So we want to continue to grow it, but we also want to be able to remove things that are corrupt and no longer needed. Some examples of contribution was the Harvard team had removed an old implementation of an annotations tool. That's 40,000 lines of code that they removed from our platform. So kudos to them. program. Those are the types of contributions we love to be able to get. Another one is Arbisoft team is working on removing an old implementation of a testing infrastructure. This is an old way of testing acceptance tests called Lettuce. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to be able to get rid of that so we can move on to the modern way that's going to actually help us move faster. So they're actually doing the effort to remove that. Finally, another example of a process is around annotating PII and feature toggles. PII, we personally identify information. For GDPR reasons, yes, we did a lot of effort in trying to integrate with that, but now we want to be able to also annotate our code base so it's clear where is that PII. In order to do that, it's not a one-time implementation. We really prioritize learner privacy, and so we want to make sure we have a sustainable way of doing that. And so there's a process, best practices around annotating that. Feature toggles is another example. Feature toggles will allow us and you to be able to figure out what are all the different things that you can turn on and off in our platform. And so we need a long-term and best practice for doing that. So I went through that very quickly. Feel free to come to any of us if you have further questions. And a lot of these are already documented in our Open edX proposals. So as summary, a lot of these architecture investments are there to help with our goals for platform health and expanding our teaching and learning contributions. Now, for the last case study here, APIs and extensions. We hear from the community that you really appreciate the flexibility and the extensibility of our platform. We had invested a lot of time in that earlier in our years. But this is a game changer for Open edX. And if you're committed to Open edX, we are committed to you. And this is something that I feel can be a great, there's a lot of potential here for technical innovations to make this happen. And we've done a little bit of effort, but there's a lot more to do here. Recently, the edX Masters team had worked on a proctoring service integration and working on a public API for integrating with different proctoring services. So that was one of our initial steps at trying to come up with a standard way of integrating with external systems. Last year, what we did do is we implemented Django app plugins, is what we call. That's a way to add plugins to our backend, and that was our step towards allowing people to add the extensions on our backends without needing to modifying the core. And we've had some great successes in the community. The one I want to highlight is from EduNext. Felipe was talking about how they've been able to now move towards Django app plugins. Has been a big success for his company and the services that he provides to his clients. So that's a great case point there. But moving forward, I'd love to be able to, in this coming year, focus more on what our API best practices are. And when we talk about APIs, we're talking about integrations, we're talking about connections, we're talking about being able to make the enhancements with the innovations that you have no matter where they live. And so it's not just REST APIs, it may be event-based APIs, it may be other technologies that we may choose. But being able to think about what we are able, being able to think about where we could actually go. And so one thing is front-end plugins, being able to, so Anna at Campus IL was talking about how her team has implemented a Google Chrome extension to be able to personalize a learner's experience. I love to be able to create edX extensions, right? So just in the browser, you can go ahead and configure and make things more flexible. There's a lot of potential here, guys, and I feel like together we can work towards making our platform even better than it is today. We're going to talk a little bit more about these front-end plugins and stuff at tomorrow's Dev Summit, so hope to see you guys there. So in conclusion, APIs and extensions, right, they also help us with these 2019 platform goals. So with that, I'm going to have Mark come back and try to wrap it up.
Thanks, Amisha. So good case studies kind of demonstrating the platform thinking that I mentioned at the beginning. A lot more work to do, but we've made some really good progress. Just a reminder, here are the 2019 goals that we're going after: driving collaborative development, improving platform health, and expanding teaching and learning contributions. So quick plug, I know I'm out of time. for the next talk. So great example of platform thinking. So LabXchange is basically a separate site built on the same platform with different learning objectives, different way of approaching things, very different from edX.org. I'm really excited for you to hear about it. But it shows the power and flexibility of the platform, and it's a good example of what we're going for moving forward. Thank you.
This is going to work great this time. Robert Liu is the faculty director and principal investigator at Harvard University's LabXchange, a university-wide online education initiative. He founded HarvardX and is also a professor of molecular and cellular biology at Harvard. Please welcome Dr. Liu.
I have to say, as an early member of the edX family, and now increasingly of the Open edX family, there are continued surprises at the depth of talent. So the juggling piece is yet something new today. I'm really amazed by that. So I've spent a number of years as a MOOC builder, founding and building HarvardX, and we learned a great deal from it. But if some of you probably recall, one of the earliest things that was pointed out was this issue of completion. And there was much gnashing of teeth, and lots of people write things, oh God, MOOCs are dead, et cetera, because completion rates are so low. But that actually is not what that means at all. What that means is there is a different set of needs out there for many individuals when it comes to the consuming of learning content. And so one of the things that we've become very interested in is how do we think about personalized learning at scale? Because arguably one of the challenges of a course, and the massive open online course, I would say, will remain as valuable as ever, but it can now be complemented with things that are more personalized, that really allow a broader range of learners to make use of the enormous amount of content that I'm sure all of us in this room has invested in. And so personalized learning at scale, one of the approaches, of course, it started with MOOCs, but as I mentioned before, is a large course, even if it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 14 weeks, is that the right sort of size, if you will, of content that you need, and is it focused really appropriately or not? And so that was a question that we've been asking for some time, and we thought, what better platform to do it on than edX? Because when you combine both edX and Open edX, 60 million plus learners, and I think this is the first time I've actually put on a slide a number even more optimistic than an ounce. So I do that with pride. Because I think that is the correct number. 1,300 organizations and growing, all countries. So we are the largest open source learning platform in the world. So if anyone's interested, and I know all of you are, in doing something transformative in learning at scale, what other platform is there than ours? Right? So what LabXchange represents is a real effort to see if we can move Open edX to another stage, to a next stage of evolution, where we'll be able to, in fact, create much more flexible learning experiences that can be personalized. And now the question is, when you think about personalized learning, of course, everyone talks about AI, right? Artificial intelligence personalization. And that is, of course, incredibly important. But I think we also need to start with HI, right? Human intelligence, personalization as well, and how can we try to achieve that? So the start of this really begins with the fact that we do have vast libraries of open educational resources. We have platforms that are primarily focused on that. We have platforms like edX, where a subset of content is OER. But when you look at OER and these millions of learning assets, you have videos, you have assessments, you have text, you have visualizations, but all of them are locked in very specific sequences called courses. But what is also true is that they're locked in these particular silos across different platforms. So what we have developed in really close partnership with edX and with OpenCraft, and I have to say, I know you all know this, but the Open edX community is one of the greatest family settings one could ever imagine for partnership to try and build something that's impactful. And so for us, working with edX very closely and with OpenCraft, what we've done is really tackled the module store of the edX platform of Open edX and proposed a replacement called the block store, where instead of things being locked into courses, they're broken up at the asset level to individual videos, individual problems, individual text documents, HTML pages, etc. So imagine using Open edX, you combine all of these into a single dynamic repository that has now been granularized at a grain size that we have never seen before. And so you have all of these videos, text, graphics, simulations, etc., that can now be meta tagged, can become completely searchable in a variety of ways. And then what you can do is, in fact, take from that, and you can start to think about what are the particular pieces of content that I'm interested in. So working with Hubble Studios, we have developed a sort of a UI UX that shows what LabXchange will be launching in September. And so what we're now able to do is that with what's in the block store, we can now lay out individual assets. So these aren't courses, these are assets. We can arrange them in terms of where they're from, staff favorites, who the community has favored, what are trending topics. And then when you do a search, and a faceted search, you're able to pull up a whole variety of assessment components, of media types, of something called a case study, which I'll talk about actually this afternoon at a breakout session. And what this allows you to do now is pick from this library not courses, but individual learning assets for the first time. What this then allows you to do is remix them. You will have the power with those assets that have been released and authorized for remixing based on the Creative Commons sort of association that they have. With LabXchange, you can now drop them into a very lightweight version of an LMS that will be free and available, so you can actually resequence them as you see fit. You can also add your own unique user content, perhaps video, perhaps text, because one of the issues that has always stood in the way of remixing is that if you take assets out of a course that tells a particular learning narrative and dump them into something else, they won't make sense. But what do we do in the classroom when we draw readings and resources from everywhere? We tell a new story. So once again, building off what edX has already done in the authoring platforms, we can now, in fact, allow users to drop in their own story and rethread the content to basically tell a new learning narrative. So the idea is that you can link the content that you remix, and what you create is, in fact, a new learning pathway. This is something that now sits in addition to a course. It's not meant to replace a course. It's shorter, it's more focused, it's focused around perhaps a smaller subtopic, and it's, if you will, personalized, perhaps by a human, which can be a high school teacher. It can also be personalized by you. Now you can search and find various assets on a topic that you're interested in, and frankly, build your own learning pathway for your own use and for the use of others that you care about. So the learning pathways themselves will be structured in a relatively linear fashion in this way. We have indicated with that little gold notch things that you have added. So Mary has created this pathway. She's a high school teacher in biology in Massachusetts. She has created this pathway, and those two notched elements are things that she has authored, dropped into the platform so that she can tell the story that her students need to hear. When a student goes into the pathway and accesses an individual asset, what you will also see is that there is a connection in the upper right hand that links directly back to the source of the content. In this case, if it is drawn from edX and something released for remixing, they can view immediately the course syllabus, and they can enroll in the edX course directly from that asset. So there is a boomerang to the source of the asset that allows them to see the asset in original context, and if it's a course, enroll in that course, so on and so forth. What we've also done is that now at the level of an individual asset, you can discuss that individual asset. So for the first time now, students, learners, can in fact build discussions, and teachers can build discussions around individual assets. It will give us a data set on the efficacy and response of individual assets like we've never had before. So what we've done is that we've created a new environment where content can be reused in a variety of different ways, that as long as the content provider has released it in the appropriate Creative Commons licensing, this allows for the first time the ability to remix it and issue it with a unique URL that, let's say, a teacher can share with her class free of charge. Because one of our goals is to try to truly open up what is accessible in terms of this learning content. And for example, a partner on edX that contributes their content, this also allows them to have an entirely new lead generation structure where in fact their courses and the ability to enroll in their courses is now connected to individual assets which are fully searchable and findable for the first time. But that's not enough. Given what we have created, we're very interested in the communal and the collective side of learning as well. It is one thing that I think we have let lie on the table far too long in terms of online learning. And so what LabXchange is also seeking to do is to graft onto this new way of interacting with content and using it, the ability to create a learning network, where instead of sharing cat videos, what we ate last night, and our best optimized vacation photos, now what we can do is share what we have learned from. How easy, I mean, it's easy for us to perhaps find the ideas of others, the proposals of others, but how do we find what those individuals used to learn to create the proposal or the idea that they had? We have never effectively created a system where we stand on each other's shoulders based on what we have learned. And so this now allows us to share these learning pathways that can be built on LabXchange. Each individual can actually have a profile, and another structure that we have created is mentoring, so that now you can connect with mentees and you can be mentored in turn by others. You can share learning pathways with others. A teacher can actually create an environment for her class where she can each week build 1 or 2 learning pathways and share them with the class. All of the performance data flows back to the teacher. We have built these discussion boards using open source software, Discourse, which then allows you to, in fact, have full-on sort of discussions around specific topic areas, but also have discussions at the level of a large topic, an individual pathway, and an individual asset. So this will create sort of a network of response to learning content at various levels of grain size that we have never seen before. So one of the hopes that we have is that, among other things, this will create greater sharing not only of proposals and ideas to tackle challenges that you might be interested in, global challenges, but that it will really connect with what you've used to learn to actually do something, right? So that learning becomes much more shareable than ever before. So why is this useful? So one thing that we're interested in is there are 1,000 flowers blooming around the world of different in-person programs and online programs that are tackling the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, so-called global challenges. There is no platform that allows you to actually see what the ideas are and to connect them globally. So with LabXchange, focused on the life sciences, we can do this. And so just one example, there's a program that is joint in between Harvard, Sciences Po, and the University of Paris, focused on the SDGs. And over the last 4 years, this program has developed 45 plus, almost 50 design proposals in almost every area one can imagine, focused on urban living, including, for example, Bubble Box that just won the Paris 2024 competition for innovation. They sit on a nice website, but how do you find it? How do you find it? So I mentioned before this new case studies type that we have developed as a content type, sort of a composite content type. Now all of these proposals and related proposals that focus on a particular problem will now have a common template, meta-tagged and searchable, that they can upload into the LabXchange environment and that will sit comfortably on Blockstore. And what this will allow is that now you can search and find an idea that you're interested in. You'll find who did it. You'll find what they used to learn to actually do it. You can contact them through the platform and do something together to make a difference. So the hope is that what Blockstore on OpenEdX will allow us to do is truly create an environment for learning that is extremely flexible, that folks like Candice and her colleagues will be able to work with an entirely different set of data around how content is used and reused by instructors, by learners, how are things clustered in ways, how that aligns with performance, how that aligns with building proposals to solve problems, and what sort of networks can now form on a platform that allows you to network through learning and trying to solve problems versus cat videos and birthdays. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So this is LabXchange. We will launch, and by the way, we are focused specifically on the SDGs on good health and well-being because of our life sciences focus, quality education, and very importantly, what this room really represents are partnerships to actually meet global challenges, to actually meet those goals. So, LabXchange launches in September of 2019. The Blockstore rolls out over, in all likelihood, the next 2 releases of OpenEdX. We are seeking collaborators of any ilk that would like to talk to us about what we're doing, and this is supported generously by the Amgen Foundation and Harvard. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take questions. Please.
That was an absolutely brilliant and inspiring presentation. I was really very, very taken with it. The question in my mind, it comes from a book of Neil Ferguson's I've just read about hierarchies and networks. You can do all sorts of wonderful things with networks, but as we know, if you look at Facebook or whatever you like, you can also do low-quality things, yes, or you can do negative things. Yes. So obviously at the top end, this is an inspiring network, and wonderful that you say, anybody come and join, but you're going to have quality assurance. Yeah. You're going to have to say to people, yeah, we invited you, and we don't like what you do, or we don't trust you, go away. How are you going to do the quality assurance? How are you going to say no to the people whose performance is not right or whose motives are incorrect?
Absolutely, great question. And we've thought a lot about this. Like everything else, you need to sort of build in small steps. Without question, the platform will be moderated. And so what we're doing right now is that we're forming partnerships with organizations like the Harvard Global Health Institute, for example, that has stepped forward to moderate all of the public health, global health content that goes on the platform. Now, this does represent potentially a bottleneck in terms of scaling, but there are a number of different models out there using peers, et cetera, of how you can get to scale in a more sort of a moderation-driven environment. We're going to explore and see what's possible, but we do have moderation panels and groups that are being set up that will tackle, specific kinds of content. Something else we're also really interested in as well, the learning network part of things. One of the things we're most excited about is that we're working with partners globally. And so for once, I think we will have an opportunity to not simply broadcast the great content perhaps we have built, but to invite, especially from the developing world, case studies and perspectives and pathways, new learning stories told that represent locally what they have done and what they need and what works for them. And so my hope is, our hope is that for the first time, this will be a truly more egalitarian platform where it's about sharing and co-development versus just us broadcasting our great stuff to the world. So our hope is that we'll also, frankly, for everyone, create an opportunity to learn about, like for example, for me, I would love to see, the health case studies from all over Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, etc., that we can imagine, and perhaps I have a colleague or two that might be working in that area, but to give voice via a platform like this in the context of learning that's tagged and searchable and findable and reusable by let's say, everyone in this room, thousands of miles away from the author, is something I think I'm very excited about. Moderated, of course. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thanks for the very interesting talk.
Hi, Remy.
Yeah, so I'm Remy Sharrock from Telecom Paris Tech. And so I have three very quick questions. How do you index LTI content? Because it's very difficult to go into an LTI component and know where are the parts that you want to index for the search engine. Do you have any plan to export to any LMS like Canvas or Moodle the path? And how do you compare to Dart? So also what was implemented at Harvard, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
digital assets for reuse in teaching. Right?
Yes. Well, so in fact, I can answer the second and the third question together. So Dart is a fantastic project out of Harvard. And in fact, Dart was partly born out of a study that HarvardX did, trying to figure out how can we make MOOC content more reusable, especially for residential classes. So Dart, I would say, fairly has a focus on how do you take a universe of content and integrate that into your in-school learning management system, like Canvas, like Moodle, like Blackboard, so on and so forth. LabXchange has no particular intention or interest in docking with local learning management systems. We're less focused on course building and focused on this notion of pathway, and pathway that sits freely in a digital environment and can be accessed by anyone. And so we didn't want to lock down into any particular set of LMS environments. So I would say Dart is more focused in the residential space for now. We're much more focused sort of externally. We're very complementary, actually, together and work together at Harvard. Yeah. So in fact, my hope is that there will be some aspects of Dart, some aspects of LabXchange that will cross into the two platforms, and we're in full discussion of that right now. I'm on the stakeholder board of Dart, so we're working very closely together. Yes, your first question about LTI, we're working on it. Oh, whoops, sorry. That was the last question. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. The LabXchange work is very exciting. It feels like the kind of thing that edX was aiming for all these years, so we're very excited to see it. By the way, there's a lost green pendant necklace. If it's yours, come and find me. So our next speaker is Dean Baker. Let me find... Dean Baker is senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. He is frequently cited in economics reporting in major media outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, CNBC, and National Public Radio. Please welcome Dean Baker.
Okay, thanks. I always bring my hard copy with me because I've more than once gone to such things and the PowerPoint, for whatever reason, didn't work, and I was standing there looking like an idiot, so I'm ready. I may still look like an idiot, but whatever. I really appreciate having a chance to speak to people here. I'm a big fan of openness, and I've actually done much more work on another side of this, specifically drug patents. And one of the issues, I'm sure everyone here knows, drug prices have really gotten out of line in the United States. And for a lot of people, it's really kind of a tragic story where you have situations where people are facing horrible diseases, life-threatening diseases, and the drugs that they need cost $100,000, even several $100,000. And even for people with good insurance, they often end up with unaffordable copays. And the reason why I find that incredibly tragic is that almost invariably drugs are cheap to produce. And I say that to people. I even say that to economist people, and they often look at me like I'm an idiot. And I go, I understand, there's money, it's expensive to research. But once you've developed a cancer drug or an HIV drug or whatever it might be, to manufacture it, it's almost invariably cheap. So we create this absurd problem for ourselves. We give drug companies patents, and naturally, if you tell them charge whatever you feel like, well, they'll charge an awful lot of money if you need that drug for your health or your life. So anyhow, that's where I more typically have occasion to talk about openness as opposed to patents or copyrights. But I have also written and thought a bit about the other side, the copyright story, and particularly with journalism. And as most of you know, our journalism, the state of our journalism is kind of in a crisis. And what I want to do here in the talk is make three main points. First off, make a simple point that copyright, I think, is a really, really bad way to support creative work. I'm including journalism under a larger category of creative work. That this is, what I'll argue is that basically it's an antiquated system. Whether it was good or not when it was first originated, we could argue that. I think it's clearly not good in the internet age, and we should be looking to other systems. Biggest problem, again, journalism. Again, I'll give you some numbers on this. But journalism's basically in a state of free fall, mostly with, most obviously with newspapers and magazines, but also with a larger issue with broadcast news as well. And what I'll propose here is an individual tax credit. And I know to a lot of people this will sound strange, but I'm modeling the idea of the individual tax credit on a charitable contribution tax deduction, which maybe people should find it strange, but it's been around a long time, and for the most part, people pretty much accept that. So I argue that we could think of that as a model for an individual tax credit, which would be much more democratic, much more egalitarian. Okay, first off, the origins of copyright. I remember I first started to read on this probably about 25 years ago, and I thought, there'd be good economic arguments as to why this was the best way to finance creative work. And you don't really find economic arguments. I mean, we all understand the purpose. You give people a monopoly, and they could profit from that. But the question is, how did we decide that was the best way to do things? And anyhow, you find copyright dates back from the 15th century in Venice. The origins, basically when you had the printing press, that they came up with copyright to prevent people from just making copies and not paying the author or anything. So that's kind of where that dates from. Then it gets picked up, of course, in the US Constitution. And I always love, I don't know how many times I've had arguments, particularly I'm on Twitter, so you get all these people, if you want to talk about copyright, they go, oh, you can't change copyright, it's in the Constitution. At which point you realize you're exchanging with someone who's never looked at the Constitution. The copyright is not a right in the Constitution. You won't find it in the Bill of Rights. It's not like if you take away copyright, you've taken away the right to free speech or freedom of assembly or religion or something. You find copyright, it's a power of Congress. Okay, it's alongside the power to tax, power to declare war. It's something Congress can do. It says explicitly it's a public purpose. Congress can grant copyrights, patents for a limited period of time for the purpose of promoting useful arts and science. That's exact terms that they have in there. So it's not an individual right, it's a policy that's used to promote innovation, promote creative work. Point being that it's not a constitutional issue if Congress were to provide alternative mechanisms, if they were to eliminate or weaken copyright patent protection. There's no constitutional issue there whatsoever. Okay, this is a power, something Congress can do. If it chooses not to do it or to make it weaker, there's no more constitutional issue than if Congress were to get rid of taxes. I mean, you couldn't go to the Supreme Court, they're not taxing me. That wouldn't make any sense. Okay, it's a power of Congress. And in contrast to the idea of making it shorter and weaker, of course, we've made it longer and stronger. It was 28 years, 14 years, and can be renewed in when it was first put into place in 1790 after the Constitution was approved, raised to 42 years in 31, 55 years in 1909, 75 years in 76. Now, one of the interesting things about it being raised to 75 years in 76 was they did it retroactively. And if that has you scratching your head, I mean, what I mean by that, they made it retroactively. It applied to things that were work that was written in the past. Okay, so you go, how can you provide incentives for things that happened 75 years ago? Pretty hard to do. The actual logic, and I'm not kidding here, the actual logic of both the extension to 75 years in 76 and 95 years in 98 was that Mickey Mouse was about to go out of copyright protection. Okay, I'm not kidding you. So Disney lobbied, Congress, and Congress responded. People sometimes have dubbed these the Mickey Mouse Copyright Acts. So they made them retroactive. So there's at least an argument going forward. But making them retroactive, that seems, to my view, it just kind of shows the corruption of what's going on here. The other point, and again, this is obvious. This is, OpenX is about using the internet. So you go, okay, the internet, we have the internet. What do you do with copyright? Well, you might just say, well, copyright's an anachronism. We're going to have to find something else. No. What do? 1998, we passed the Digital Millennial Copyright Act. We apply copyright to the internet. And of course, that's a difficult thing to do because obviously we could instantly exchange information, music, videos now. We could do that in a second time, basically costless. Okay, so what do? You make that You make that expensive to do, and you also impose a burden on intermediaries. So in the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, if I have something on my website and someone sends me a note that says, hey, that's my copyright, you're infringing on my copyright, I have to take it down, at least if I want to protect myself from being sued. And of course, it's punitive. Okay, so it's not just actual damages. Again, I think a very important point, because very often the actual damages, if I have a 40-year-old song up on my website, it's still under copyright, what are the actual damages? Suppose the person who wrote that song, were to sue me for the actual damages. 1,000 people, 10,000 people download it, maybe it'd be $2. Trivial actual damages. But they're punitive damages. Punitive damages could be very significant. I could owe thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for allowing something to be exchanged that was worth a few cents. Okay, that's what the Digital Millennial Copyright Act did. And as many people know, their efforts to make this stronger, the Stop Online Piracy Act, would require me as an intermediary. I have my website. I have to police it proactively. I have to make sure that no copyrighted materials on my website. Now that, of course, went down in defeat in the US. There have been efforts to have that put in place through the back door through international treaties like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Didn't go anywhere. I mean, that ultimately ended up being stopped. And just recently, I forget what it was, I think last week, Europe passed legislation, the European Union, that in effect does that. So anyone who has a website is responsible for preemptively removing copyright protected material. So they've made everyone into a copyright cop. Okay, so I'm just saying this again, this is not news to many of the people here, but the point is this is not something that I would say fits well with the internet, fits well with modern technology. Okay, so how does this affect journalism? Well, basically, the internet's undermined the whole ad-based model of journalism. First off, it's taken away advertisers. The obvious, I hadn't realized this for the longest time because I'm a big fan of Craigslist. I thought that was really neat, I do think it's really neat. I want to sell a bicycle or something. I put the ad up on Craigslist, I can get $50, $100, don't have to, great. Okay, that is great, but this was a major source of revenue for newspapers. Want ads, the little want ads that people took out, that was a major source of revenue. All gone. I don't think there's any newspaper in the country that still has want ads. Google and Facebook. Okay, again, there's other issues there. I think there's issues about monopoly, the way we've allowed them to basically take over large chunks of the web. But for better or worse, they're there. And what that means is a lot of money that otherwise might have gone to online news sources instead goes to Google and Facebook as ad revenue. The third way that the internet's undermined ad revenue is it's took a big whack out of the department stores that used to be major advertisers. I remember when I was growing up in Chicago, the big department store there was Marshall Field's, and they'd always have these big ads, full-page ads, multiple full-page ads, particularly as you got close to the holidays. Marshall Field's is out of business. That's true in a lot of cities. So you had very big advertisers that had been whacked by Amazon and other internet retailers who, if they're advertising a newspaper, it's really a very, very small chunk of their ad revenue. Also recorded music, books, those also have been hit by the web. I was looking at this recently. If you just take things as a shared GDP, I'll put those in numbers. I like to yell at people that we should always put things as a shared GDP because you throw out really big numbers, it doesn't make much sense to people. 0.19% GDP in today's economy, that would be about 40 billion, 38 billion a year. It's down to 0.5%, about 10 billion a year in 2018. Okay, so a very big hit. Books went from 0.18%, about 36 billion a year, to 11%, 11 hundredths of a percent, 0.8% to 0.11% in 2018. That would get you about 22 billion a year. And newspapers, this is simply what people pay for buying the newspaper rather than, this isn't the advertising revenue. So, literally the circulation, that went from 36 hundredths of a percent of GDP in 1990 to 2,500% of GDP in 2018. And I got my visual aid from the hotels. I was leaving this morning, USA Today, and I hadn't seen USA Today for a while, but I was sort of struck by how thin it was. Now, USA Today was never the New York Times, never the most in-depth paper, but it's probably about half the size of what you would have picked up 15 or 20 years ago. So, it exists, but barely so. And you could hardly a week goes by where you don't hear some major news outlet laying people off, cutting back in some major way. So this is really, to my view, a serious crisis, that you're seeing news outlets really whacked. And I've had many complaints about the news media. They don't always do a great job covering things, but it's not clear what the alternative is. We lose a lot if we lose the newspapers. Okay, so tax credit alternative. So as I said, modeled on a charitable contribution tax deduction. So when I had someone on the internet ask me the other day, well, what planet is this going to happen on? I said, well, the planet where we have the charitable contribution tax deduction. What I'm proposing, you get a refundable tax credit, say $100 annually per person, per adult. It's refundable, so that means even if you don't owe income tax, you could still use it, $100, $200 annually. Recipients register like nonprofits. So who qualifies? Well, same sort of rules as you have for nonprofits today. I'll go into these in a little more detail. And the recipient's condition of getting the money is you're not eligible for copyright protection. So the idea is you get paid once, not twice. So if you're getting money through the tax credit system, you don't also get copyright protection. Again, I have people yelling at me, oh, you're going to take away people's copyrights. Well, we're giving them a choice, but you don't get to do both. So if you want to get the money up front, you can't then go out and get a copyright and get it a second time. Okay, from the standpoint of the taxpayer, you can contribute to any combination of individuals you like. If you happen to know someone who's a writer, or a singer, a journalist, whatever they might be, you could give to that person if you like. If you, say, like mystery novels, you can give to an organization that sponsors mystery novels, movies, whatever it might be. Okay, so you could contribute to any individual who qualifies under the system or organization that qualifies under the system. So again, if you don't know anyone particularly that you think a lot of, you can just contribute to an organization. And you can divide it up. Okay, I don't know how much you want to divide up, if it's $100, how much you want to divide it up, but that's your option. So you want to give it $10 to 10 different organizations or 10 different individuals. That's up to you. Credit's refundable, so that means that everyone's able to take advantage of it. And again, I contrast this with the current system with the charitable contribution tax deduction, because a lot of people look at that and they're thinking, oh, well, that's, if someone, some really rich person wants to give $1 million, that's their business. You go, okay, well, that's fine. That, you could say, is their business. But the point is, we pay for roughly 40% of that. We just lowered the tax rate about cheat. The tax rate for high-income individuals used to be 39.6%. So if some really rich person gives $1 million to some organization they like, well, that's $400,000 from the taxpayers. Okay, and again, that's people have this idea, well, it's their money. No, they owe the tax money. I used to live in a condo, and we had a condo association, and we had someone who said, oh, well, you shouldn't make me pay the fees, the dues, because I do X, Y, and Z. You go, okay, well, if you want to get paid for X, Y, and Z, we'll talk about that. But you owe the dues like everyone else, otherwise we have to make up for those lost dues. Okay, and that's how, I think we should think about taxes. We set a tax code. You could argue whether it's good or bad, but once we set it, that's what people owe. And if we say, okay, you want to make $1 million contribution to what qualifies as a charity, and we give you $400,000 back, that's the same thing as if we wrote you a check for $400,000. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is fairly small by comparison. So there's much, much less money at stake. Okay, and as I say, just simple arithmetic. If you make the credit $100, 250 million people use it. We have roughly 270, 280 million. I have to check the exact number of adults in the country, but say 250. Some number obviously won't use it. That would generate $25 billion a year to support creative work. At $200, $50 billion a year. You could do the arithmetic. If you said $50,000 a head, for creative workers. At 25,000, it gets you 500,000 creative workers. That's an awful lot of people you're supporting, writing books, doing journalism, whatever it might be. So it's an awful lot of people. And I should also point out, this doesn't preclude other mechanisms through other ways in which they might get support. So if you're a writer and you want to give writing courses, you could do that. If you're a musician and you perform music live, you could still do that. So this doesn't, I once gave a talk about this to the union, I forget what the name of the union is, but represents creative workers, and they got really angry. You're saying they should only get $50,000 a year. And I go, this is $50,000 through this system, which is way more than they get through the copyright system. So it's not a cut. They can still do other things. Some of you may have heard Alan Kruger is a great economist. He unfortunately died, he committed suicide tragically last week. But he was working on a book that I guess is due out sometime later this year on music. And one of the things he did a survey of musicians, and he found most of them actually made their money through music lessons. Okay, well, you can still do music lessons. Okay, so other ways, that doesn't mean it's your whole support. It's almost certainly for the vast majority of people, if you pick that number, 50,000, way more than they're getting through the copyright system. Okay, from the standpoint of the recipients, you file with the IRS just saying what you do. Just like nonprofits do now. So if you're a journalist, you put down that you're a journalist. If you're a musician, you put down, you play whatever instruments, you write songs. You just say what you do. Okay, the IRS doesn't make an effort to determine whether you're a good musician. Just like today, they don't, if you're a religion, they don't make an effort to determine whether you're a good religion. You just say you're a religion. And the only issue from the standpoint of the IRS is that's in fact what you do. So they have to be able to audit you so that if you could say, okay, you said that you were a musician, well, what music did you do? If you're a writer, what writing did you do? So you just basically have to own up to, here's what I said I'm going to do, here's what I do. And, I put down disclosing nonprofits. There's a Form 990. I don't know, many of you had to fill those out, but, that's, basically your financial records. What did you spend money on, in broad categories? Who got paid what, that sort of thing. So that'd probably be more of a factor for organizations, say an organization that support jazz music or something like that, than for the individual. But in any case, basically you're just keeping records to make sure there's no fraud. Okay, other points about it. Recipients, from the standpoint of recipients, you don't want to have duplicate, as I said, you don't want to get paid twice. So the point about this is that if you register for to get money in this system, the tax credit system, you can't also get copyright protection. Okay, so you could argue over how long a period that is, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, arguably it should be longer. But the point here is you don't want it to be a farm system. So you don't want to have this idea that singers are going to go out there and try to get money through the tax credit system and they'll get whatever they get, but then they hope to establish a name for themselves and then they're going to sign with a big recording company and then they'll get super rich. Okay, that may happen, but you don't want to make that easy. Okay, so what you say is that, okay, If you're going to get money through the tax credit system, then for a period of time, 3 years, 5 years after you were last registered in the system, you're not eligible for copyright protection. Again, you made a choice, you chose to go into this system, you can't turn around and get copyright protection. What's really nice about that from an economist standpoint is it's self-enforcing, because suppose someone cheats. So, I turn out to be a great singer. Okay, I'm not going to be a great singer, but, someone is in the system and, they go, wow, look, everyone loves my singing, American Idol, whatever, so everyone wants to get their music. So they say, okay, well, I'm going to go out now and get copyright protection, and then I'll really get rich. Well, what's nice about that is someone does that. Well, someone then says, oh, guess what? You were in the system. I'm going to make 1,000 copies. I'm going to make 1 million copies and send them all over the country. Go try and enforce your copyright. Okay, you go into court, you violate my copyright, you go, oh, no, you don't have a copyright. Okay, so there's no burden of enforcement. You basically are just saying that people could go ahead and cheat. They could go ahead and get a copyright. It's just unenforceable. Okay, so it becomes completely moot. And so that's, at least to my view, a very nice aspect of the system. It's at least hard to cheat that way. Nothing's ever impossible. A third point, because again, I've raised with this people go, okay, how come, I have the $100 credit. How about I just give you the $100, you give me the $100, and, then we both ripped off the government and, no one knows the better. Well, you just put in a minimum there. So you say you can't get anything unless you get, I pick 3,000 is the number I usually use, but some low but non-zero number. So yeah, so all of you are sure smart enough to go, well, I'll just get 30 people. Well, you could do that, but okay, so I'll get 30 people and they'll all give me their $100, and then we have $3,000 that we could split up. Well, that's a fair bit of coordination for not all that much money. Okay, so I think if you put in some, again, whether 3,000 is the perfect number, I have no idea. But the point is, if you put in some low but non-zero number, you make it not worth anyone's time to try to coordinate and game the system that way. I should also point out, because people always raise this, how people game it, I could do that much worse if I'm some billionaire and I go, hey, I'll give you $1 million and we'll split my $400,000 savings. That's actually much easier. Okay, so you'll claim to have some bogus nonprofit, I'll give you $1 million or get $400,000 on my taxes and we each get to pocket $200,000. That's much easier. So if we're worried about that sort of gaming, it's much easier under the current system than with the tax credit system. Okay, just a couple more things from the standpoint of the taxpayer. It would be handled just like the tax deduction in charity now, except it's fully refundable. I should also point out the tax deduction has always been heavily slanted towards the rich, both because they have more money to give out, but also they're in a higher tax bracket. But that's become even more the case after the Tax Act that was passed last year. It used to be the case, these aren't exact numbers, but it used to be the case that roughly 75 to 80% of the people took the standard deduction. And what that means if you take the standard deduction is that you're not going to, you don't benefit from having a charitable contribution. So if I'm taking the standard deduction and I gave $1,000 to some charity I liked, I'm not deducting that. I don't get any benefit from that. So most middle-income people, they were already taking the standard deduction. That fell. We don't have good data yet because it's just the first year that's in place, but the estimates from the IRS are that somewhere between 90 and 95% of the population is going to now take the standard deduction. Because they changed in the tax code, they made it much more desirable to take the standard deduction. I actually agree. I think that's a good thing. We don't want people wasting their time on their tax forms. But the point is that relatively few people, and of those people, overwhelmingly higher income people, are those who are now benefiting from the charitable giving tax deduction. A last point, just for simplicity, we could make it, and I'm always a big fan of simplicity in these things, we can make it so that if people want, they never even have to deal with a check or credit card and getting reimbursed. We could just make it so that, let's say I know that a particular organization supports the type of music I like or books or whatever. They have an ID number. I just put it down on my tax form and gets sent directly from the IRS. I never have to play with it. So you can make that very, very simple from the standpoint of the taxpayer. Okay, well, just to sum up, as I say, I think we need a new mechanism for journalism, creative work, more important for journalism than for creative work, but important for both. Advertising revenues plummeted. Again, the money people get from creative work through copyright-protected work has plunged. And I just say that I think this is a plausible alternative. What's important about this, I think, is first off, that we don't have some government bureaucracy determine what gets supported. That is a very nice feature of the copyright system. This preserves that. And the last point is that it should preserve an adequate flow of money. So I have a few minutes left for questions if people have any. I know you all agree with this, so. Okay, yes, sir.
Yeah, I go. Hello? Okay. Yeah, I usually go to the National Association of Broadcasting every year, coming up in Vegas. And I'm also involved in the Open Music Initiative with MIT and Berkeley Music School, so I'm very adverse. I know a lot about the copyright stuff. If, without changing the various different laws, couldn't, say, my favorite newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, open up a nonprofit and I donate to the nonprofit, and then just part of the Wall Street Journal's activities that, interns that are developing, learning, doing educational type of things, that they're under their particular wage thing, and I still get the tax credit for, basically to the nonprofit without trying to, because then with the model you're talking about basically doing away with all of the IP for the newspapers, and in the case of music, the same kind of a thing, so that they have no IP that they can protect intellectual property. Is that a potential solution to the, completely no IP for newspapers and music?
Well, I'm not sure specifically what you're saying. So let's say the Wall Street Journal continues to exist as it is now, and say they get a number of journalists who are writing for them. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought it was, I never turned it on, damn it. Okay, so they have a number of journalists who are writing for them. That material is not copyright protected. Now, they could put that in the Wall Street Journal just as I can, like at Baker's Journal, because it's not copyright protected. So any material produced in this system is available to anyone who wants to reproduce it. So there certainly would be nothing to prevent a company that's for profit, that has copyrights in other areas, from taking material that's not copyrighted and using that. So they would be able to do that, just as they could take work that's not copyrighted today. Everything I write I put in Creative Commons, so they could take anything I write. They don't want to do that, but
I'm talking about the funding towards the Wall Street Journal, because I can't donate to the Wall Street Journal. I can't donate to the Wall Street Journal and get a tax credit, but I can if I do it to the non-portion entity of the Wall Street Journal, if it has a nonprofit. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, as long as they're strictly separated. So the nonprofit has no copyrights, anyone could use it. So if they want to maintain their affiliation in the Wall Street Journal, but again, the Wall Street Journal has no special claim to that. So the New York Times could pick it up too, or I could pick it up, anyone can. So in that sense, it doesn't matter. I mean, they may be attached to it in some way, that they pick who gets it, but in what comes out of there, they have no special ownership of.
So, how do you see getting people to use the tax credit? Because the recording companies and other people in that business space, they're going to try to pressure any developing artists or journalists or what have you. Don't ever take that credit, or you're never going to get. How do you see getting around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. My guess is that, if you look at the distribution of who gets what on copyright, the vast majority of people get next to nothing. So I certainly could believe that the recording industry says anyone who touches this, we're going to have nothing to do with, and they'll probably intimidate a lot of people. But my guess is that a lot of people will realize, well, I wasn't getting anything from you guys anyhow, and there will be people that do take advantage of it. So just think of it, you're the standpoint of a singer or a songwriter or something, and you go, oh yeah, I want to be with the big recording industry companies, but then you see someone else who's getting a decent living. They're getting 40, 50, 60,000 a year through this system. You go, I'm better than they are. So I think the pressures will work fairly quickly. You put a big pot of money out there, I'm pretty confident people will go to it. So but it's a reasonable question. And again, a lot of people have that view. No, I'm going to be the next. I don't know. I was going to say Olivia Newton-John, but that's really old. Lady Gaga. Okay, there we go. I'm more modern. So, okay, I guess I'm out of time. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dean Baker. I thought we were taking on a big job reimagining education. You got the U.S. government. Go. Okay, go. Do it. For our last keynote, we will be hearing from Walter Bender. Walter Bender is the Chief Learning Architect at Sourcero. Previously, he founded the Sugar Labs, a nonprofit foundation, and in 2006, Bender co-founded One Laptop Per Child, a nonprofit association with Nicholas Negroponte and Seymour Papert. Please welcome Walter Bender.
Okay.
Mic on, yeah?
I think mic is on. Okay. So back in a previous life, I used to teach a freshman seminar at MIT, and word on the students, the admissions requirement at MIT, you've got to get good grades in math and things like that, but you also have to either be able to juggle or pick locks. So I'd always survey my students, say, well, how many of you juggle, how many of you pick locks? Oftentimes they would do both. But one year, one of my students didn't raise his hand. And I say, what, you don't juggle or pick locks? And I pursued it a little bit. Turns out he didn't consider anything less than 4 juggling. So, well, yeah, all right. Okay. So let's see if I can get this little thing to work. Which button do I push? This button. All right, great. So I'm gonna do a little learning pathway, my own learning through a series of activities I've been involved in. I'm going to start off with a case study, One Laptop Per Child, and the point of it is it's really about transparency and having a transparent platform. I want to talk a little bit about AI. AI is sort of the buzz these days, and I want to make an argument that transparency is really important in AI as well. And then I'm going to try to bring it all together and try to explain why this is relevant to Open edX. I also, this is technology and learning. What is technology? I always like to go back to fundamentals. My favorite definition of technology comes from Alan Kay. Alan defined technology as anything invented after you were born. And my grandson, this is actually from a few years ago now, he's 6, but back there he was about 2 with his laptop, and it's just stuff to him. And the phones and the internet and YouTube and all this stuff is just stuff. It's not technology to this generation. And I guess my hypothesis about education reform has always been it's not going to be a top-down driven phenomena. It's going to be a generation of children coming into the system with such different expectations about technology, about learning, about stuff than we have, because it's technology to me still. They're the ones that are going to change it as they grow up through the system. So my mentors in this journey are these 2 gentlemen. We lost both of them over the last couple of years. Marvin Minsky on the left and Seymour Papert on the right. They were co-founders of the co-directors of the Artificial Intelligence Lab for many years at MIT. Marvin focused on machine learning. Seymour focused on people learning. And it was a really nice exchange between the 2 of them. Jerry Wiesner, when Jerry was one of the co-founders of the Media Lab at MIT, former president of MIT, and he brought Seymour and Marvin to the Media Lab. And the Media Lab, as Jerry put it, was about learning and expressing by people and machines. That was really what it was all about. That was sort of the pinnacle of what our ambitions were. And these two guys really drove a lot of that. They also wrote an interesting book together in the early 1970s called Perceptrons, where they sort of defined this thing called the neural network that is sort of the basis of a lot of the machine learning that we're exploiting today. My other mentor is the woman whose back is slightly towards us in this picture, Cynthia Solomon. I think the fashions tell you a lot about when this photo was taken. Cynthia was probably the first logo teacher, in a real logo teacher in a classroom. She was one of the co-inventors of the logo language with Seymour at Bolt, Beranek, and Newman back in the 60s. And she and Seymour wrote a paper, 20 Things to Do with a Computer, in 1971, I think. Those 20 things are basically everything the maker movement does today, although they had a few ideas the maker movement hasn't figured out yet. But the point is, what Cynthia's insight is that the real opportunity of all this technology is that you can engage in debugging. You can engage in problem solving. And it's in that process of solving problems where the real learning happens. There's an expression, learn from mistakes, and even better, learn from the mistakes of others. They never tell you who other is. You're looking at them. But that said, I'm not sure that you can always yourself and struggle with it and wrestle with it and work through the problems. So I'm not going to go into much more of the history because time is short for these presentations. But I would just say that the three of them inspired Nicholas and I to start one laptop per child in 2006. Actually, one more thing. This is another colleague of ours, Gary Steger. I really like this sentiment that the goal is not the teaching, the goal is the doing. What are people actually going to do with the knowledge? What are they going to do with the skills? They're going to. It's not to, have them do math. It's to have them be a mathematician. It's really about the doing as much more than just the acquisition of knowledge. So anyway, with that as sort of the background, we did this. We built a low-cost laptop computer. We wanted to try to get them into the hands of children all around the world. Yesterday, we heard a little bit about the program in Uruguay. This one actually is a picture in Thailand from around 2007. I'm not going to go into too much of the detail of the laptop program itself, except to say that we designed the platform, both the hardware and the software, to be as open as possible. And we did that very deliberately. One of the reasons why we did it was this. Calcupé is a little town about 2 hours outside of Asuncion, which is the capital of Paraguay. Paraguay's one of two landlocked countries in South America. It's in the middle of nowhere. Calcupé's in the middle of nowhere. In every single school we went to with the laptop, there'd be kids who'd set up a little laptop hospital and fix the laptops. And we actually put extra screws inside because we figured the kids might lose some screws. We designed the laptop so the kids could repair it themselves. And the significance of that is there are a lot of reasons why that's important, but one thing that's important is that the laptops we deployed in, for example, rural Nepal in 2007 are still in the field running today. They're not in a landfill. They're still on the field running today, and that's because we designed the platform. We tried to make the laptop as indestructible as possible. You could drop it from up here, and it wouldn't break, but things break. But if you can fix it, then you can still use it. And that's And the people that fix it are the kids themselves, the users themselves. And in part because they don't have the luxury of coming to, having a service contractor, they have to do it themselves. And we enable them to do it themselves. And we did the same thing with the software. The software platform we developed for them was called Sugar. It's not a curriculum. It's a collection of tools. We gave the children a collection of tools and let the teachers and the children develop the curriculum. That wasn't our job, in part because curriculum standards are so different across the different places we were, but also because we were ignorant of that. But what we could do is build a nice collection of tools. And we did something else. We also, there's sort of this East Coast, West Coast thing. On the West Coast, they talk about open source. On the East Coast, they talk about, because of Stallman, they talk about software libre, free software. It's probably all the same. It's probably just semantics, but you could sort of think about this progression from having it be open so you can look, to having a license so you can actually take advantage of what you're seeing. But in the case of Sugar, in the case of the software for the laptop, we went one step further. And we said it's not just a matter of being able to look at the code, and it's not just a matter of having a license to make a change. You also need some scaffolding to enable you to actually make that change. Because without the scaffolding, you might have the license, but you're not going to have the ability or the opportunity. So we did a lot of thinking and a lot of engineering around trying to make the software be accessible. And one of the things we did, quite simple, that key on the keyboard is a view source key. One mouse click, one key click, and you're seeing the source code to any program you're running on your laptop. A second key click, and we had this idea of copy on write. You have your own copy of the program to break. And so we put a lot of thought into how to make sure that the software was accessible. We used Python for the platform because we thought Python had a certain clarity to it, so the kids could actually learn to hack it, and lots of stuff we did around that. And so the other thing we did was we gave the kids access to our IRC channel. So there was an IRC app on every laptop. And what happens there is that the children are able to look into the world where the domain experts are discussing the actual problems, the real problems, and solving real problems. So they can participate in that process. And at first, when they come in, these are kids, and they behave like kids, but we tolerated that, and we explicitly tolerated that, so they started to learn to participate in the conversations, and eventually they became the developers. And I remember I explained all this at a Libre Planet conference in 2008, and John Gilmore asked me, well, so how many contributions have you gotten from the kids? How many patches? And in 2008, the answer was 0. But these days, we're running at about 50% of the code is coming from the kids. So if you build the scaffolding, if you actually design towards letting your users really be contributors, and you sort of respect them as contributors and you expect them to be contributors, they can do it and they will do it. And again, there's actually some of the contributions also came from teachers, believe it or not. Not just the learners, but also some of the teachers. And there's actually a secret. I'm going to share a secret with you. Teachers can learn too. We don't give them the opportunity very often, and we certainly don't give them the encouragement very often, but teachers can learn too. And so building this ecosystem, again, you have to design it. It doesn't just happen, and you have to build the scaffolding in. But it did happen, and it does work. So this is sort of my story about open platforms in the context of learning. There are a couple other things we did that are important, some of which I think are beginning to be reflected in some of the tool chain and platform that you guys have been developing here. There was this wonderful idea, I mean, it actually predated the Enlightenment, but it really caught hold during the Enlightenment, and that's sort of the idea of the lab notebook. This is a page out of Leonardo's notebook. This is a page out of one of the kids in Sugar, their notebook. And the idea that you aren't just doing, making, but you're also stopping and reflecting on what you're doing. And you've got a place to do that, and you've got, you develop a portfolio, and we can talk about assessment and metrics and measuring things, measuring what you know, but the portfolio shows you what you can do. And it not just shows the administrator or the teacher what you can do, it shows you what you can do. And that's super, super powerful and really important. Just a little bit of some results. This is data from Uruguay. Uruguay was the first country in the world to give every single child a laptop and free internet access. They did that beginning in 2007. It took them 3 or 4 years to complete the whole thing. Montevideo was the last place they went with the laptops. So we have some before and after data in Montevideo that's kind of interesting. If you ask kids, what do you do with computers? They said, well, we play games. Not a big surprise, they're kids. After the deployment, a year into having Sugar, you ask the kids, what do you do with computers? And they say, we play games. They're still kids. They're still playing games. But they're also using this tool for all these other activities. They're searching for information, they're writing, they're drawing, they're painting, chatting, they're making videos, they're writing code, they're using email, they're blogging, they're doing all this other stuff. They're using this tool. Now, it had 0 impact on their standardized test scores. Okay, didn't change a thing in that regard, but it made them be participants in what we do and how we actually get things done. So it's a different way of thinking about what the platform's for, but it definitely has an impact. So I want to switch and talk a little bit about AI now, and I think for a lot of people the goal is teacher in a box. Let's see if we can capture everything about teaching and everything about mentoring and put it into a little wind-up box, and pop out comes a teacher when you need it. And there are all these different things that people are working on. A lot of these things are themes at this conference, and they're all probably pretty important. Lots of companies working on these kinds of things as well. The one that I'm most interested in personally is this idea of contextualization, that I really want not just to get the information to someone, but I also want to make sure that when they get that information, it's got a context that's going to make it be understandable to them and useful to them. But in any case, now the question is, how does AI address this, and is it also necessarily even a good idea? But how many of you are Go players? Any Go players in the room? There's got to be some. Really? I expect in this audience there'd be a lot more. For many years, the best computer Go algorithms, the best computer Go programs were mediocre at best. Many years ago, decades ago, IBM built the best chess playing program on the planet. But Go is much more complicated in terms of the apply of the moves for looking ahead, and nobody could actually crack it. Only last year, Google with AlphaGo built, using essentially a neural network, the best Go playing machine on the planet. Better than any human, much better than any human. The problem is, and I think those of you who are Go players will back me up on this, you look at what AlphaGo does, and you don't understand anything about why it's making the moves it's making. So AlphaGo might be the best Go player on the planet, but nobody can learn from it. Nobody can actually learn anything about Go or get any insight into Go from watching what AlphaGo does. And so if your goal is not just winning, but also learning, and I think that's a goal we all share, AlphaGo and sort of this opaque machine learning approach is maybe not the right approach. So what we're doing is we're trying to understand a little bit about what makes us human and see if we can play off of what makes us human and make the AI connect to the things that make us human. So we're all, as humans, we're expressive, we're social, and as Antonio Batro likes to point out, we're also both learners and teachers, all of us. And so if we can use AI to sort of amplify these attributes, then maybe we'll make a little bit of progress towards our goal of learning. And it's these things, when you add them up, is how we sort of record knowledge and history and make progress as humans. We've been working, and other people as well, on a hybrid approach to AI. And the significant thing here is that what we're trying to do is have the AI look at the world much more like the way people look at the world, so that when the AI fails, and AI, just like people, isn't always perfect, it's going to have failure modes. The failure modes are much more sympathetic, they're much more human-like in terms of their failure. And we can begin to understand a little bit about why the AI is doing what it's doing and what the consequences of its choices are, and we can maybe even shape those choices and have an interaction with the AI. Here's a classic example from the field of natural language processing. Yeah, I saw a man on a hill with a telescope. And at first glance, it's quite simple, but when you stop and think about it, there's so many different ways to interpret that. And the key to the approach we've been taking is, typically what happens is you parse something like this and you make a choice. You say, this is the most likely, statistically most likely from the millions of documents I've ingested on Google, this is statistically the most likely choice for what this sentence means. That I was using the telescope to see the man on the hill. Or maybe it was, I saw the man with the telescope on top of the hill. But we make a choice. And what we're trying to do is be a little bit less sure of ourselves to begin with, leaving a little bit of the ambiguity in place when we confront a situation like this, so that we're not making that choice up front. What we're doing is we're sort of leaving all the choices open, like we do as humans, until we have a little bit more information to make a resolution. And so when you begin to do something like that, the failure modes are suddenly going to be a lot more understandable and a lot more human-like, and you can start to build up this relationship. So we build these dependency graphs, but we have a forest of them. We don't just have a single one. And then we use those dependency graphs then to disambiguate when we get to the point. So we can do it for things like, we can begin to manage the ambiguity. We have a simple question-answer interface. I ask a question. This was a database that we built for a management company, condo management company. How do I get rid of a refrigerator? Well, that's actually nowhere in the database, but it turns out that if you sort of take that forest of trees, that forest of dependency graphs, you can match it. Oh, I know how to get rid of a couch, and maybe a refrigerator and a couch. We also ingest ontologies, so we know, like when we're dealing with, say, a medical area, we've looked at data from the National Institutes of Health. We know the hip bone is connected to the leg bone, independent of whatever the course material might be, and we can get some answers. So it's a little bit more human-like and a little bit more flexible, and it allows us to start to think about information, knowledge exchange, AI in terms of solving that list of problems I showed earlier, a little bit more human-like. We're applying it to all these different areas. And I want to just quickly tell you some results from some of the case studies we're doing. We're doing a lot with adult education In this case, this is this is a group that has not the luxury of trying to get wisdom. They need skills. And so they're in the classroom. They're adult learners. They don't like to ask questions because as adults they're shy about these kinds of things. But in fact, they're comfortable asking the AI questions. And probably the most significant result is that the ensuing discussions with the mentors, with the instructors, with the subject matter experts are much richer because a lot of the mundane stuff is taken care of by the AI. So AI is not substituting for, but is making the time with the instructor much richer. I think we still need teachers. We still need mentors. This is sort of as seen on the internet. I think you can all read it, but I'll read it anyway just because I think it's funny. What's your greatest weakness? Interpreting the semantics of a question, but ignoring its pragmatics. Can you give me an example? Yes? We're a long ways from solving all these problems, but again, I think we can have sort of a graceful relationship with the AI that is a lot more impactful and a lot more useful. So just to make a direct connection to Open edX, we've integrated our AI in an iframe inside of the Open edX platform. This is a course we developed on the AppSembler platform, and you can drop the system right in. It's ingested the course content. And then the nice thing that happens is that, and I actually should have mentioned this with the previous case study I was showing as well, the knowledge is not just used within the context of the course itself, but it's always available after the fact. So they can start to ask these questions of the course material. I don't know about you, but I've got a memory like a steel sieve. And so I need to constantly remind myself, well, how do I do this? I switch a lot back and forth between Python and JavaScript. So I'm always forgetting, well, how do you do this in JavaScript? I'm writing JavaScript like it's Python, things like that. So I'm always on the job when I'm actually trying to apply the knowledge is when I need to be able to ask these questions. And so we do it here inside of Open edX, but we also bring it outside into the context of the real world when you're actually trying to use and apply the knowledge. And so we've got a little personal edition of this that we're going to make available to the Open edX community. So contact me. The details are still a little fuzzy, but if you're interested, feel free to get in touch about that. And finally, ultimately, when you're a learner or when you're applying knowledge, trust is really important, and transparency is fundamental to trust. And so I want to leave you with that, and actually one plug, Marvin, Cynthia actually edited a number of essays on learning that Marvin wrote over the last decade of his life. MIT Press is coming out with this early next month. It's a really great collection of essays. Those of you who don't want to actually purchase the book, they're all online already too on the OLPC website. So enjoy. Thank you very much. Yeah, happy to take questions. I'm just checking to see what I forgot. So back in the days before we had PowerPoint, you'd walk out onto stage with your overheads, and like Marvin would do it, he'd just dump them on the floor. Oops, I dropped them. And then, go down, up, this is interesting. Let's talk about this for a little bit. Let's talk about this now. This scripted stuff is, really a step backwards. But anyway, happy to take any questions if there are any.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So One Laptop Per Child was a groundbreaking project at the time. It was one of the most affordable ways to access technology. it provided technology to people who otherwise not be able to afford it. There's a project called the Kano computer out these days, which is a build-it-yourself laptop based on the Raspberry Pi. I think it's a spiritual successor to One Laptop Per Child, maybe. It costs $130, but it runs Raspberry and Linux. And there's a lot of other creator-focused platforms out there, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, Edison. Most of them are affordable to people in our situation, but they're not cheap. Amazon will sell me a Android-based Fire tablet for $40. And Android's mostly a consumer-focused platform. You can't build an Android application on Android. How do we get kids today, especially kids in developing countries, to want to be technical creators, not just consumers?
Yeah, you know, I tried to convince Nicholas that we should distribute the motherboard independent of the rest of the laptop, which I think would have satisfied certain needs. I don't think we can do it without some program of subsidy. I mean, you know, certainly, you know, Moore's law and all is going to help and has helped. And you know, I don't think that the industry is ever going to forgive us for destroying the margins in the laptop business. You know, so that helped a little bit too, getting those margins out of the way. And free software Libre helps a lot as well. Sugar runs great on Raspberry Pi, for example. But I don't think that you can do this without some degree of subsidy. And typically subsidies of that scale come from governments. And it's you know, it's tough because most politicians, you know, this is a long-term thing. This is not Santa Claus dropping computers under, you know, under trees. It's a long-term commitment, and most governments aren't very good at long-term commitments. So it's going to take some time, and you know, so you just got to keep doing it. So you know, the sugar community is still doing it. We haven't given up. We haven't stopped, but it's not going to happen overnight. You know, I think, you know, the good news is there's lots of people doing those kinds of things. You know, I've always had a problem with you know, laptops and these kinds of things, you know, in part because, you know, my basic goal is learning to write and learning to code. And the first thing you do is take away the keyboard. That doesn't, and then you know, you also need to spread out a little bit, and it's just tough to do on these kinds of devices. But you know, the reality is this is what people have, and so we need to also reach to them with these devices as well. So keep at it. Don't give up. Any other questions? I think that's it. I think I've been told stop. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Walter. It's great to see all the different approaches to education, from the laptops to Open edX. We're all trying to get to the same place. Walmart is our cornerstone sponsor, and they're doing interesting things internally, educating people, and they have sent us a movie to see about what they are doing. Oops, sorry.
It's a priority to me. I try to raise my daughter the way I was raised. You definitely have to step up. There's actually somebody that looks up to you, and I do need to be a good role model for her. She's my whole world. She keeps me focused. Being where I'm at right now is wonderful, but I always want to move forward. I'm always trying to stay a step ahead, and I do have long-term goals. When I started out here at Walmart, I was overnight stocking. I was good at what I did. Knowing that I want to be a store manager, it gives me that drive to want to be a leader. I made the decision to take a class with the Walmart Academy. It definitely opened my eyes up to wanting more with the Walmart Academy. I feel like the sky's the limit. It's a great learning tool for everyone. It's a program that gives you the tools that you need to succeed as a member of management. You know, they say you can't teach old dog new tricks. You can always come up, you can always achieve your goals with Walmart, and I know if I can do it, anybody can do it.
One of the things that Lee really took away from the Academy was his communication. And being at the Academy, he was able to express himself more. He was a go-getter. Once our associates come through the academy, what they take away here is a sense of pride. They're revitalized and they feel like, I want to do something more with my career. I want to advance. I have the tools now to get where I want to be.
Everything that I'm doing now came actually from the academy. Shortly after I was promoted to an assistant manager, if I had not have gone through the class, I would probably still be a support manager right now. I feel like I've found my best self here at Walmart, and I do feel like the hard work is paying off with my child as well. She's able to get the things she needs, and it also makes me happy that I can do the things that I need to do for her. I want her to look back at me and want to actually do better than what I did. Everything that I do, I try to make sure I'm making her proud.
My name is Luis Gomez, and I'm a cybersecurity analyst, and I'm proud to support the technology that makes Walmart run.
We work in an incredibly fast-paced environment.
His goal was to be in security.
That's always been his laser-focused ambition.
To go faster, to do what we need to do for our customers and our associates. The best way to do that is to take technology and empower our people.
I got my associate's degree at Credit College in computer network and support. After working at a Walmart store for a bit, I moved over to the David Glass Technology Center.
Once he's identified something that he wants, he just completely throws himself into it.
The ability to collaborate with diverse personalities and his dedication and drive in pursuing his technical certifications.
At Walmart, we're preparing our workforce for the future because the future is here today.
He said that he really enjoyed being cashier, so once I heard that, I really wanted to get a job at Walmart. Luis always has taken care of me and my sister when we were young. I'm proud of him.
De madre soltera como yo, ¿verdad? Yo me siento muy contenta, muy agradecida con Dios y estoy muy orgullosa de mi hijo.
My family, they moved from El Salvador here about 25, 26 years ago. They've given me the greatest opportunity in my life.
My name is Berta Gomez and I am Luis' mom.
I'm Walter, and I work with Luis.
I'm Ashley, and I'm Luis's sister.
I'm Terry, and I work with Luis.
I'm Jackie, and I lead the Global People Division at Walmart. We need more people like Luis.
All right, thanks again to Walmart for sponsoring, making it possible. Thanks also to our three keynotes, Rob, Dean, and Walter. Very nice. Thank you. And I know you all like the location here. The weather's great. Aquarium was amazing. We're going to try to top it next year. To talk about that, we're going to bring up Rui Ribeiro. He is a project manager for the Now project, which is implementing a Portuguese national platform based on OpenEdX. He's been active in our community for a number of years and has a special announcement.
So as you can see, next year OpenEdX will be in Lisbon, Cascais, on that fabulous campus. That is the Nova SBA campus. It is fresh new, is all for digital learning, and everyone is very welcome to come and have a great time. Thank you.
I know I am looking forward to it. Rui didn't mention he was actually the surfer in the video. He didn't say that. Okay, to wrap us up, I'm going to call up John Mark Walker, who's the head of the community for the Open edX team at edX.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So lunch is almost ready. I don't want to keep you from that, but I just want to thank everybody for coming. It's been an amazing conference so far. This is the end of our plenary, but at 1 o'clock we have the sessions, the breakout sessions this afternoon. Don't miss that. There's several great ones. I want to thank a couple of people in particular. Ed, are you around? Ed Zerikor. I want to thank Ed because he's the guy who makes all the magic happen. He helps us all get together and do this and put out a great conference, like provide funding and support, which is awesome. So thank you, Ed. Ned is the guy who makes the trains run on time. Thank you, Ned. He's doing very good. And Roberta, where are you? Roberta makes the trains run on time as well. Thank you very much, Roberta. And finally, all the edXers, would you please stand up? If you work at edX, please stand up. Thank you for helping make this the best conference. Largest Open edX conference ever, of all time, until next year. So thank you, and eat lunch, and then we'll continue at 1. Thank you.